it seems sometimes when Western policymakers approach Middle East issues, whether it is Iran or the Arab-Israeli conflict, Palestinian issue, that some of them shape policy while intoxicated. And Iran is a case which should be highlighted, because here, once again, we have Western policymakers engaging Iran in negotiations, refraining from confronting Iran, because the state of mind is that ostensibly one should not confront, one should engage. So here we have, on one hand, US policymakers engaging Iran in diplomacy, at the same time, when Iran is also engaging anti-American terrorists in killing Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. At the same time, when Iran is engaging North Korea in co-developing missile launchers which could launch nuclear warheads, conventional warheads, also all the way to the US mainland. And here we have Iran engaging itself with subversive terrorist elements in the Persian Gulf, trying to bring down every single pro-American oil-producing regimes in Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Bahrain and Kuwait and Oman. And while the US is engaging Iran in appeasement, in diplomacy, in persuasive communications, Iran is engaged with the unpredictable anti-American regime of Venezuela, which already has Iranian missiles on the ground and is not subtle about its anti-American intentions. And certainly, while the US is engaging Iran diplomatically, at the same time, Iran is engaged as a sponsor with scores, maybe hundreds, of terrorist sleeper cells here on the US mainland. And certainly, all that is consistent with the track record of the regime in Tehran. Because even if one were to ignore the fact of life that President Rouhani is not the master of Iran, but rather the stooge of the Ayatollahs and the mullahs in Tehran who handpicked him in order to carry out their policy, even if you were to believe that it's Rouhani and not Khamenei who calls the shots, then Rouhani's track record is an unclassified issue. And all it takes is to go through the track record to realize this is the guy who did mislead Western powers for 10, 15 years into assuming that Iran never had any intention to develop nuclear capability. That was the message from Rouhani for many, many years. And certainly, if you're dealing with Iran, one should be aware of the overall track record, and the track record is obvious, among other things. This is the regime of the Ayatollahs and the mullahs, which was willing to sacrifice 500,000 Iranian kids in order to clear the minefields during the Iran-Iraq war. We're talking about a regime which has nothing to do with diplomacy or engagement as a strategy, but rather a regime which is intent upon attaining a historical goal, and a regime which is engaged with apocalyptic vision, imperialistic design, and certainly has nothing to do with any of the fundamentals of Western democracies, of civil liberties, or of engagement as defined by Webster Dictionary. They are involved with engagement as defined in the Iranian dictionary, in the Islamic dictionary, which means basically you engage a party which you cannot vanquish at this particular time. But as learned from the lessons of the Prophet Muhammad, you engage them diplomatically until the point when you assemble that muscle which can overcome your counterpart, and that's when engagement ends and devastation begins for the very naive Western interlocutor. One hears about Iran usually from the point of view of Israel in this city. Namely, friends of Israel are up in arms to supposedly prove to Israel that Israel can trust its friends in Washington, because Washington will never allow Iran to hit Israel. And when I hear that coming from genuine friends of Israel, I shudder, because nothing is far from realism than the assumption that Iran considers Israel a prime target for a nuclear warhead. I would like to state very, very clearly, Israel will not be targeted by a nuclear warhead. People can relax. And this is not because the Iranians are philo-Jewish or philo-Zionist. It's because Iran has a different order of priorities. And as far as Iran is concerned, they are set upon attaining their mega goal. And the mega goal of Iran, not only today, but going back at least 14 centuries, whether you are an Ayatollah-like regime or a Shah-like regime, the mega goal has always been the domination of the Persian Gulf, and later on the domination of Sunni Islam as a prelude to further expansion of the Iranian empire, of the Muslim vision of Iran. Israel plays no role in Persian Gulf politics or in Sunni Shiite conflict. In order to advance that mega goal, Iran has to deal with a mega obstacle. And the mega obstacle, for all the right moral and strategic reasons, is the US power projection in the Persian Gulf, in the Indian Ocean, in the Middle East at large, and throughout the world. In order to remove that mega obstacle, they are therefore developing the mega capability. And the mega nuclear capability aims at removing the goal, removing the obstacle, advancing the goal, all of which are independent of the existence of Israel, Israeli policies, Arab-Israeli conflict, Palestinian issue, Jerusalem, or Jewish settlements, communities in Judea and Samaria. The problem with friends of Israel, Jews and non-Jews, who are so excited to prove their pro-Israel leanings, and therefore transforming the Iranian threat as if into an Israeli issue, is that the message is very, very destructive to themselves and to America at large. Because if all you are trying to do is to spare a third party a certain wrath, then you obviously allocate less resources to that wrath or that danger, and you are not as intent upon uprooting that potential threat. But once you're aware that it is you, the US, which is the primary target, then the order of priorities takes quite a different shape. And the question is, what would happen if Iran would become nuclear? And once again, that is very clear if you observe Iran and if you observe the Middle East as a whole. And one obvious ripple effect of nuclear Iran would be the meltdown, the demise of all pro-American Arab oil-producing countries. They will have to decide, do we want to join them, the Iranians, or to be vanquished by them? None of them, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, none of them individually and even combined, they are not a match for conventional Iran, let alone for a nuclear Iran. And therefore, once there is a nuclear Iran, one has to expect a meltdown of Arab oil-producing regimes, which would cause havoc to the supply of oil, to the price of oil, and once again, would devastate America's economy. Should there be a nuclear Iran, one has to expect further emboldened, anti-American, unpredictable, potentially violent Venezuela, the current regime in Venezuela. And since they already have Iranian missiles on their land, what would stop this unpredictable regime in Caracas from asking the Iranians to station or to dispatch certain nuclear elements into Venezuela? And how difficult would it be to transfer that from Venezuela to any of the metropolis here in the U.S., on the U.S. Mainland? Certainly, it would provide a tailwind to the terrorist cells in this country, and absolutely, a nuclear Iran would further erode that which is left of America's posture of deterrence. I cannot imagine any American president, Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, hawk or a dove, I cannot imagine any American president engaged in a brinkmanship type of relationship with a nuclear Iran. No American president will dare the Iranians in a who blinks first game and saying, if you dare launch one, let alone 3 nuclear warheads at Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, we are going to transform Iran into a parking lot through our hundreds of nuclear warheads launched at Iran. No American president would risk such eventuality, and the result would be obvious. It would be up for the asking of the Iranians. They would submit the ultimatum, and the U.S. will have to abide. The U.S. will have to retreat and concede and gradually withdraw into smaller and smaller scope of influence. And as we know from the very American sports football, the closer you are to your own end zone, the closer is the other team to score a touchdown. The delusion by some members of the House and the Senate and many people throughout America that withdrawing from battleground against terrorists overseas is going to make America more secure has nothing to do with the 21st century. In the 21st century, globalization is not limited to agriculture and economy and science. Globalization also refers to terrorism. And the closer you are to the terrorist end zone, the more secure is your team at your own home. And once again, the closer you are to your own end zone, the closer are the terrorists for a repeat of 9/11, but probably in a much more horrendous, egregious scope. When one talks about Iran, we also hear, by the way, from hawks as well as from moderate doves, that there is an option. And the option is more decisive economic sanctions. There is even a term for that, biting sanctions. And when you say biting sanctions, it sounds so effective and so impressive that people are even misled into assuming that it's very effective. But again, one needs to examine the track record. Biting sanctions, effective sanctions, any sanctions did not stop North Korea from becoming nuclear, did not stop Pakistan from becoming nuclear, and has not slowed down Iran from its pursuit of nuclear power, has not changed the regime in Cuba, and there are many, many such other precedents. And the question is, what does it say about policymakers who are determined to learn from history by repeating the mistakes rather than learning from mistakes? And unfortunately, anybody who proposes, who wastes time on the issue of more effective sanctions is only playing inadvertently into the hands of the Iranians, because every set of new economic sanctions provides, by definition, more time for the Iranians to achieve their goal. And right now they are at the last lap of the very, very long marathon. We are not talking about a regime in Iran which is concerned about the standard of living and the welfare of their inhabitants. If they would have been, they would not have been mullahs or ayatollahs. And therefore the whole issue of standard of living, economic sanctions on one hand, and ayatollahs and mullahs regime on the other hand is an oxymoron. You simply do not approach them on that level if you wish to transform their policies. And the obvious conclusion from the last 20 or so years of sanctions against Iran, and more so the sanctions with regard to North Korea and Pakistan and Cuba, is obvious. There is only one option, which is a valid option, morally especially, as well as strategically, if one wants to spur the world of a potential nuclear confrontation, and that is the military preemption. And military preemption, when it comes to Iran, by definition, in my mind, involves no boots on the ground. No boots on the ground for a simple reason. There is no need for boots on the ground to devastate Iran's nuclear infrastructure, especially if the reference is to the US with its formidable military presence in the Persian Gulf, in the Indian Ocean, and with today's sophistication, even arenas beyond the Persian Gulf in Indian Ocean are very, very amenable to the performance of the role of ridding the world of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. We're talking today about a regime in Iran, which is a minority regime, and as a result, we keep hearing from Americans and other folks that the way to deal with that is through regime change. There is no chance, not even a iota of a chance, for regime change as long as the US or Israel refrain from challenging the regime in a physical, military manner. Because you cannot expect domestic opposition to outflank the US or Israel from the hawkish side. When the opposition in Iran went through their attempt to topple the regime in Iran, and they were left hanging high and dry by the US and the free world, they concluded that they could not defy the regime, and the message was transmitted to them in a very crude, loud and clear manner by the US and the rest of the free world. And therefore, for anybody who wants to bring about a regime change, you first have to change the message to the opposition. And the message today is we, the free world, do not feel that we're strong enough to defy Tehran. And that message is the worst message for the opposition. The message needs to be, no, we have been reawakened to the new reality, and we are going to prove to the regime in Tehran that we are much stronger than they are, and here is the message: preempting in a military manner. That would embolden the opposition from within. And the fact that this would be carried out with no boots on the ground would also transmit the message. Nobody wants to occupy Iran. Nobody wants to annex Iran to Iraq or any other country. We are doing what we do because we want to free the world of the wrath of the apocalyptic vision and state of mind of the Ayatollahs, which happens to be consistent with what the majority of Iranians also wish to do, but are unable to do because they are facing a Western headwind. The military preemption with no boots on the ground would perform also the transformation of Western headwind to a very robust Western tailwind to the attempts by the opposition in Iran. And therefore, every single statement, whether it's from the administration or from certain media outlets, that no one should pay attention to those warmongers who want to drag the US into another Iraq or Afghanistan and Iran, that message should be corrected in a very, very robust manner by stating very clearly, no boots on the ground. Yes, it must be disproportional. It must be devastating military preemption. But again, no boots on the ground.